Thank you, Senators. We had gone back into motions to place Bill 351 on the top of the second reading file. So, Senator Uggan, you're recognized on your bill.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for our colleagues consenting to reconsider or revisit Bill number 351-33. Madam Speaker, I know that our previous discussion was on the motion that was added or an amendment that was proposed on page 2 to amend section 6225 to incorporate number 7, a new number 7, all sworn officers of the Guam Fire Department, and then in the subsequent paragraph to incorporate the Guam Fire Department. Also, Madam Speaker, the amendment that I circulated did not include, because the clerks were still working on it, did not include the amendment that was previously passed and sponsored by the majority leader. So I just want to make sure that that's understood, that sub-item number 5 was further amended to incorporate other affected personnel at DYA. But my amendment is to incorporate a new subsection 7, all sworn officers of the Guam Fire Department, and then to insert the Guam Fire Department in the subsequent paragraph, please, Madam Speaker.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And that's the update of where we're at with 351. There was a request for recess for Senator San Nicolas to prepare an amendment. So, Senator, you're recognized. I think everybody should have a copy on your desk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, we have prepared an amendment. It has been circulated to all members and provided to the clerk. And this amendment is in line with the earlier discussion we had on the proposed amendment to Bill 351 that brought us back into the second reading file of this bill. And it was with regards to the funding of the hazardous pay that we're going to be now adding to the personnel costs of the Customs and Quarantine Agency, the Guam Airport Police, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Parks and Recreation, the Department of Youth Affairs, the Attorney General's Office, and the Guam Fire Department. Right now, Madam Speaker, because we've already passed a budget for this fiscal year, those budgets that were passed reflected lump sum amounts for the personnel expenses of these particular agencies. Those lump sum amounts factor in the cost of paying for those employees at their current rate. With this bill, we're going to be adding a plus to that rate because it's going to be base pay plus hazardous. And that plus was not factored into the personnel costs of those respective agencies. Granted, their budgets are a lump sum budget, but because that plus was not factored in, that lump sum is going to end up being short if the funding is not provided to make up for the difference. So what we've drafted for the bill is an amendment to add a section 3 for the effective date that would basically provision the language necessary for this act to become effective as soon as the funding becomes available. And so the language reads, section 3, effective date. This act shall be effective immediately upon enactment of a fiscal year 2017 budget amendment or supplemental budget reflecting an increase in or reprioritization of revenues sufficient to fund the provisions of this act, or a completed transfer of funds by Imagalahin Guahan sufficient to fund the provisions of this act, or a provision within the fiscal year 2018 budget which shall reflect the costs associated with this act. So basically what this amendment will do is it will provision several ways for this funding to be made available to pay for this added cost. And if it's not provided in a budget amendment in the current budget, if the governor does not transfer the money to be able to pay for it, it does mandate that FY 2018's budget shall include this cost in its in its cost projections. So we're trying to make sure that the proper language is in place to fund the added cost that's going to be reflected in this hazardous pay adjustment that would be effective with this statute if it were to pass into law. So that is my amendment, Madam Speaker, on page 3, lines 15 to 16 of the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the amendment, Senator Uggan, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, anytime that we want to highlight and ensure transparency and openness with regards to finances of the government of Guam, I certainly appreciate taking that approach. But Madam Speaker, first and foremost, this was discussed previously when this bill was on second reading initially. And just taking a look at the numbers. In the fiscal year 16 budget, up until June, most of our law enforcement officers were receiving hazardous pay. Because DOA stepped in, they recognized that there was no legal authorization at that point in time for a number of our law enforcement agencies to receive hazardous pay. Madam Speaker, they brought that to the attention of the respective agencies. The respective agencies brought that to the attention of the respective chairs in this body, and that's what we have before us. If we're talking about budgetary implications, this is a proposal that upon exposure, that these law enforcement individuals, uniformed officers, will be eligible to receive hazardous pay. What was also mentioned previously is that there is a safeguard here to ensure that there are two entities that are collaborating with each other. One is the appointing authority of the law enforcement agency and the Department of Administration. They must collaborate together to ensure that the information is certified and that all of these law enforcement uniformed personnel, upon exposure, that it's justified in terms of receiving that compensation. Madam Speaker, I stand up in opposition of this proposed amendment because it would necessitate or it would add an additional requirement. This is my understanding of how I read it. It would add an additional requirement in regards to authorizing hazardous pay. This is a policy that we're trying to set forth by virtue of Bill number 351. Do we allow for hazardous pay to be paid to our law enforcement personnel when, in fact, they are exposed to hazardous conditions? I'll give you a very good example, Madam Speaker, and this is just within the last week and a half. There were two individuals who unfortunately, who drowned. Let me just, because this is after the fact. The two individuals, one in Pagat, right off the shoreline, and the other individual in Taragi. Our firefighters and a number of our law enforcement personnel, literally, the search and rescue team went out there to the waters. They searched repeatedly for 4 or 5 days in hazardous conditions to try to find and identify these individuals and their body. Fortunately, they were able to find one of the individuals. Madam Speaker, that's what I'm referring to in regards to allowing the law enforcement agencies in collaboration with the Department of Administration to be able to certify upon exposure whether in fact these individuals are eligible for hazardous pay. And the way I read this, Madam Speaker, it says upon enactment of a fiscal year 2017 budget amendment or supplemental budget reflecting an increase. There's another component to this, Madam Speaker, is that we know that public safety continues to be a priority in our community. We know that this body in the fiscal year 17 budget provided budget transfer authority to the governor of Guam should it be required for these law enforcement agencies. So if you take a look at the tools that are readily available, Madam Speaker, first and foremost, it's passing a comprehensive proposal that would allow for hazardous pay to be recognized and to be paid out to our law enforcement uniformed personnel who are exposed to hazardous conditions. Secondly, the governor has that transfer authority. Should there be need for additional funding to be able to cover this hazardous pay, and I have to stress it again, only upon exposure. Because I don't want people to misread the intent of this proposal. It's not to add to their pay. It's upon exposure of a hazardous situation or a hazardous condition that in fact the governor can use his transfer authority to be able to augment our law enforcement agency's budget. So Madam Speaker, I stand in opposition to this amendment. because I don't think we need any more hindrances to the process. It's either we pass a policy, we allow our law enforcement entities in collaboration with DOA to be able to be eligible to receive hazardous pay, and then let the executive branch carry it out. Every quarter, I believe it's every quarter, we receive an assessment of the compensation of our public employees. Madam Speaker, a report. Every quarter, even our respective chairs can always request, if in fact hazardous pay has been paid out to our uniformed personnel, what exactly is that amount, so that we can track it. But to try to stay away from providing that allowance to our law enforcement agencies, Madam Speaker, I'm just going to have to stand up and oppose any amendment that will restrict it until fiscal year 2018. Because certainly this is an issue that our uniformed personnel are being exposed to today. They did receive it up until June of this year. We need to give them that policy and that flexibility so that in fact all of this can be certified and that they can be compensated accordingly. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motion, on the amendment, are there any speakers? Anyone who would like to have the opportunity to speak on the amendment? Senator, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It needs to be clarified. If it is the will of this body to provision for hazardous pay to be paid to employees who are exposed to hazardous conditions, absolutely, let's do that. But it must also be the position of this body, if we are going to do that, to make sure that that the funding to pay that hazardous pay is also provisioned. If the hazardous pay was discontinued in June and the fiscal year ended at the end of September, then the new fiscal year that started October 1st needs to factor in the cost of that hazardous pay. We've had, in a previous inquiry earlier throughout this discussion, confirmed that the current budgets do not reflect the added cost of having to pay out additional hazardous pay. And so what this amendment does is it says, yes, we're going to pay the hazardous pay, and this hazardous pay will be effective to be paid as soon as the funding is made available to pay it. Otherwise, without this amendment, Madam Speaker, what we're basically saying is, you didn't budget for it, we're going to authorize it, and we're setting you up to be short. So I ask my colleagues to please consider supporting this amendment. It doesn't just make it effective for fiscal year 2018, that is the fail-safe, the stopgap. In the event that we're not able to identify the money to make the amendments necessary, or in the event that the governor does not transfer the funds, then we're definitely going to fund it in next year's budget. It's unfortunate that we have to be entertaining this bill now, and it wasn't an issue that was entertained in our current budget. You know, perhaps the agencies should have made it clear that these items should have been budgeted for FY 2017, but they were not. And so going forward, if we want to do this, let's make sure the money is going to be there in order to be able to pay for it. Just to clarify once again, Madam Speaker, it was shared with me that the consolidated revenue and expenditures report of our government is already tracking $10 million short. So if the revenue is already tracking short, and we're going to be adding an additional cost on the personnel budgets of these various agencies, the strain is going to compound. So I'm asking us to pass this amendment so that we can make sure the money is going to be there for this to actually be implemented. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to pass this, it's going to get implemented, and then by June, July, we're going to be short. And then what happens is it causes a whole ripple effect, because then vendors start getting paid later, and tax refunds start getting paid slower. And all these things on the current obligation side of the book start getting more and more delayed because they're using cash to try and fund these mandates that we're putting out there. And then in the end, when we don't pay the vendors and it accumulates over a 2-year period, we come back to this body and we begin entertaining bond bills for $45 million to pay for vendors and to pay for next year's vendor costs. And we tack interest on top of that, and we end up paying for these kind of ripple effects over 30 years. And so what I'm asking is, I'm not saying no to hazardous pay. I'm saying if it's the will of this body that we do this, let's make sure the necessary language is in place for us to pay for it without shortchanging the operational budgets that are already in place for these agencies. All you need to do is introduce a budget amendment that either reprioritizes funds from the existing budget, introduce a supplemental budget that's going to increase the amounts for these agencies based on higher revenue projections or new sources of funds, or have the governor actually complete the transfer of the money to pay for this. And if none of that happens, then we're committing that we're going to budget for it in 2018. So I don't see anything overtly unreasonable with the amendment. It gives us the necessary safeguard in place to be able to make sure that we're going to pay for what we are committing to obligate ourselves to for all of these hardworking employees in our government of Guam. So I humbly ask my colleagues to please support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. There is an objection to the amendment, so I'm going to call for the vote. So all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. The amendment failed. On the, before we go into the main motion again, I just wanted to clarify to Senator Uggan that on your amendment, it passed. I just wanted to make sure because that was before I went on to Senator Siniclis. Because I said there was no objection, and then it carried, okay? All right. So then now on the main motion of Bill 351. Any other discussion? So in the motion then to send 351 to the third reading, so ordered. Senator Uggan then on 285.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to, because we're back to discussing Bill number 285-33, I'd like to move for the placement of Bill 285-33 as amended by the committee into third reading file, please, Madam Speaker.
Actually, Senator, it's already on.
Yeah.
But we just kind of set it aside because of the
Okay.
map. So
Okay, I was just questioning whether we had to move
because
again.
it's been set aside. So
Okay.
we left off with you the request for a map, and that maybe you can explain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a copy of the map, and please, Senators, if you don't have it readily available on your desks, they were circulated earlier this morning. A copy of the map is before your desk, and I'd like to move, before I explain the content of the map, Madam Speaker, because I was under the impression that it was incorporated into committee report, and it was not. So if I can request that this be appended to the committee report.
Thank you, because normally what it is, if you're going to make reference to any document that's not part of the committee report, that you're right, that it be part of the committee report. So with that, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have with me a communication by representatives of the Harmon Industrial Park Association. And I just want to read it verbatim so that I don't take it out of context, but it explains the map, and it also responds to one of the questions that was raised by members of this body previously when we were discussing Bill number 285, and that is what would happen if, in fact, part of the roadway encroaches onto private property. So, Madam Speaker, if I can beg your indulgence, and I'll just read verbatim in terms of the information that is provided. It says the amendment proposed is to allow for the A&E to be the initial phase, and once that is completed in 90 days, the legislature will give the approval to proceed with phase 2. Thus, this would eliminate any private property benefiting from this project or legislation. Plus, HIPAA, which is the Harmon Industrial Park Association, won't allow this project to benefit anyone or handful of their members. So that is a communication by one of the members of the HIPAA Association. Now, in regards to the map, Madam Speaker, I'll read it verbatim. Attached is a map of the Harmon Industrial Park area. Highlighted in red are the roads we are looking to improve. Once done, it will provide 4 different ways to enter, exit Harmon Industrial Park. The first one is to and from Marine Corps Drive via the main entrance, which is Ilipog Street, and that is the roadway as you enter, you pass GTA, and you enter into the Harmon Industrial Park. That's the primary entryway that is presently being utilized. So that is to and from the Marine Corps Drive, so any enhancements would be inclusive of that. The second aspect is to and from Marine Corps Drive via the backside of Kmart. So if you take a look at the map, and on Marine Corps Drive on the far left of the map, you can see the entryway right adjacent to or abutting the Kmart store. The third item is to and from Hamburger Road via Black Construction and Pernix Construction, formerly DCK Pacific Construction. If you go to the far right of the map, the red portion that is going upward, that would create an intersection to the Hamburger Road, as mentioned just a second ago, from the Harmon Industrial Park roadway to the Hamburger Road. And then finally, to and from Tizen via Tunwokin Flores Street through Home Depot. And what it is, if you take a look at the map to your furthest left, the additional red markings, if you look at the intersection entering into Marine Corps Drive next to Kmart, you follow that roadway straight away to the bottom portion of the map. That is the Tunwokin Flores Street, and that would exit through Home Depot. So these are the parcels of roadway, Madam Speaker, that the Harmon Industrial Park Association is looking at highlighting and refurbishing and expanding and upgrading. I'll just close with this final statement by one of the members. It says, this will greatly alleviate congestion, improve flooding issues, plus provide the general public with alternative routes to Dededu, Barrigada, Tizen, Agana, and elsewhere. So, Madam Speaker, that is in a direct response to one of the questions that was raised on the private property. Once again, the intent of HIPAA, based on the information I provided you, I read you a little earlier, and also based on conversations, is that if in fact there are any private properties inclusive in this roadway, that the intent is not to encroach into private property, but to refurbish just those that are in the public right-of-way area. Secondly, the map is provided that shows you the different intersects and the areas that will be highlighted in terms of any improvements to the Harmon Industrial Park. I want to just also say that, Madam Speaker, I want to thank the HIPAA Association members really for highlighting this and coming up with an approach, albeit through tax credits, that would allow for the refurbishment of this particular roadway, and also for many of the signatories of the petitions that were submitted as part of the committee report. We understand that during the rainy season, there's constant flood in that particular area, so there are really some health issues also in addition to allowing for the eventual upgrade of this roadway. So I ask our colleagues for your consideration and your support for this initiative. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Welcome. On the motion, Mr. Vice Speaker, and then Senator Tom Ada.
Just a point of inquiry, Madam Speaker, before I have any further comments. Does the government have any obligation, if it's discovered that there's private property, will HIPAA purchase the private property and take tax credits against the government for the purchase of the property?
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, for asking that question. The intent here is to ensure that the A&E is completed, and then that would delineate any private properties that the roadways will be encroaching into. At that time, when the legislature comes back and revisits this project after the 90-day time frame that is provided here in the proposed legislation, we as a community will be able to delineate that, and then have further discussions with DPW as well as with the HIPAA Association members, so that in fact that can be eventually resolved. But it's too early right now at this point in time to say whether in fact the HIPAA Association is willing to absorb that, other than just the upgrades, which was part of the conversation during the public hearing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Vice Speaker, did he answer your question satisfactorily?
No, not really.
Okay, that you want to
I just want to make it clear. Then with this legislation, the only tax credits that are going to be held against the government will be the cost of the A&E. And is there any commitment by the passage of this legislation that would bind us to any further amounts? Or is it just the cost of the A&E? Because if it is, then let's make it clear in here that it's just the A&E, and that's, but I thought I remember an amount 4 million.
Well, on page 4, it says, contributes to the cost of the design, labor, and materials for the rehabilitation and improvement of the roadway.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, is what the bill says and what is being said on the floor seems to me two different things. And if it was just the A&E, I have no problem with it.
Madam Speaker, if I may?
Yes,
Vice
Senator,
Speaker.
you
First and foremost,
question?
I'd like to yield to the chair because that's when the additional amendments were incorporated. But this is a phase project, like it was just read a minute ago. The initial phase 1 would be the A&E, which would delineate and highlight all the private properties, if in fact there is any that will be impacted by the upgrade of the roadway. The second component is setting up the structure so that within 90 days, when the A&E is completed, then this body will revisit it. The structures, the framework for the law is already in place, so that the decision of the body at that point in time is to either proceed and to address the private properties if it's the wishes of the body at that time.
Senator, do you want to add on to that?
If the inquirer would like to yield, I can add some further clarification. Yes, the work of the committee, and even during the during the public hearing on the bill, we specifically asked if we could first fund the architectural and engineering for the project. And we wanted to do this in order to remain consistent with how we approached the financing of the labor and delivery ward of a GMH, which, while the project is still waiting to be undertaken, at the very least, getting the architectural and engineering funded and getting that done first really helped us to get a clear picture of what it was that we were going to ultimately be authorizing for purchase on behalf of our people. And so in this bill, what the committee actually did was, after the public hearing, working with the author of the legislation, we incorporated that language necessary to make sure we funded first the architectural and engineering. And if you refer to page 7, line 15 through 23, this particular section here spells out that before any credits can be approved, we're only authorizing $300,000 for the architectural and engineering design for the Harmon Industrial Park roadway project identified in this act. And so that's the only amount that's authorized. And then if you go to section B here, it says that upon completion of that A&D, the legislatura may authorize the initiation of the rehabilitation and improvement. So first we're authorizing the $300,000, and then after that $300,000 has been expended and the A&D has been delivered, then we may authorize the project to proceed. So we're creating the necessary processes for us to be able to have a better due diligence. And I really feel like it's going to be effectively handled. And just for further clarification, if you look at the effective date, because these are tax credits, and I get up regularly to make sure we're not impacting the budget, these credits can only be claimed after the expiration of this current fiscal year. So while this act will enable them within 90 days to begin to make expenditures necessary to pursue the architectural and engineering for this project, that $300,000 won't be claimed until after October 1st, 2017. So we're not going to be impacting current government revenues with the redemption of these credits. And that will allow us on the budgetary side to be able to provision, at least for the first $300,000, come FY 2018. So to answer the question, yes, we do require first the A&E to be completed. Only after its completion may we then authorize additional tax credits pursuant to this act. But we do create the necessary hurdles for us to make sure that the due diligence is in place for us to clearly see what it is that we're going to be purchasing with these tax credits on behalf of our people for this project. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Mr. Vice Speaker, you still have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too would love to have all of these roads redone, okay? So it's not an issue of my opposing it. I am just concerned that because we have all of this in one bill, whether or not HIPAA could feel that this legislature has made a commitment to them to move forward with the rehabilitation, even though we put may. I spent $300,000 to do the A&E. I didn't mean to just throw it down the drain. You guys were going to follow up with approving and getting the necessary approval from everybody to do this. Will there be detrimental reliance on the part of their part that we've included all of this in one bill, or just finding someone to pay for the A&E and then having us look to see whether or not we're going to use eminent domain to be able to purchase the rest of it, and when we get eminent domain and we've purchased the rest of the private property, we can use federal funds to do it? Or is it just we want to do it now, and we, on the reliance of this, we'll spend $300,000, we'll take it against next year, won't pay our taxes this year, and we'll take our credits next year? Whatever. I'm just saying I'm a little concerned about it all being in one bill. And I know we say that it's in phases, but will there be detrimental reliance on the part of these? Can they claim it because we've approved them to spend $300,000 to do the A&E?
On the motion, is anybody else? Oh, yes, I do have Senator Talmada on the list. If there's anybody else, please raise your hand.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly, conceptually, I support the idea of the stakeholders in the Harmon area stepping forward, and they'll put their cash up front so that the roads can be rehabilitated, and then basically get compensated for that through tax credits. But as I was looking through here, I was looking to find out, so who's going to be going out there to competitively procure the A&E services that's going to be needed in phase 1? And then if we get to phase 2, who's going to actually kind of monitor to make sure that, if we're going to put $4 million worth of road work in there, that it is being done according to some standard? And as I was looking through here, I guess I was looking for Department of Public Works, because they're the ones that normally are, involved with highways. And I couldn't find that here, and so it wasn't clear who is doing what, other than the businesses will put their money up front, and I guess GIDA will somehow keep track of who's going to be entitled to some kind of tax credit. But after all this exchange of money, who's making sure that we've got roads that meet certain standards? So maybe if the author can respond.
Senator, do you yield?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the good senator. Certainly, anytime that we're effectuating our public roadways, DPW should be a part of that equation. So, Madam Speaker, I will be open to any recommendations of amendments by the good chairman of DPW.
Senator Ada, are you okay with the response?
Well, the quickest way, other than going in there and is to just add a new section that in the procurement of A&E services and the subsequent procurement of construction, highway construction services shall be under the supervision of the Department of Public Works, something to that effect. I mean,
Okay.
now, I hope it's not, the burden's not being put on me to come up with the exact language, but I'm basically saying that really will probably then satisfy the concern that we have this new section in there that says he's the one that's going to be responsible for doing the procurement, the construction, the supervision, etc.
So we're going to take a brief recess then to be able to do that.
Bill 362?
The legislature is back in session. There was a request to set aside 285 until the amendment can be prepared. So moving forward, Senator Tom Adda on Bill 362 that was also set aside.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, on Bill 362, the question was asked earlier, where is this 15 acres of Chamorro Land Trust property that's going to be set aside for this Haddin Amot Chamorro? And so what's being passed around right now is an aerial photo. One is on the first page, it shows generally where this area is being proposed. And if you take a look at the bottom of the first page, have you gotten a copy?
Not yet. All right, Senator, you may proceed. I have a copy now.
All right, so if you take a look at the bottom of the aerial photograph there, you'll see there in yellow with the arrow pointing to the general area that says Haddin Amot area. And as a frame of reference, off just to the left of it is the Mangilaw Golf Course. Somebody was using the Nelson residence as a reference point. That's up to the upper right-hand corner of that aerial photograph. And then you'll see almost somewhat northeast is the Atikow Elementary School. On the second page shows you a much closer view of this Haddin Amot area. And again, you'll see off to the northeast there the Mangilaw Golf Course as your point of reference. And then just to the south or the northwest, just to the southeast of it is that Haddin. And you'll see that it is from the cliff line down to the coastline is where the area that's being proposed for the Haddin Amot Chamorro. So that should get everybody zeroed in on where this property is at. The other point with Bill 362 is it seems that there's been a lot of questions as to, we're talking about establishing a biodiversity conservation easement. And the question came up, well, what is a biodiversity easement? And I think we're kind of overthinking it, because really when you strip everything down, what Bill 36 does is it establishes an easement. It's an area that's going to be set aside for a specific purpose, and that specific purpose is for the protection of a variety of various plants. And in the on page 2 of the findings and intent, you'll find there on line 5 that basically this easement is being set aside, and we're going to call it the Haddin Amot Chamorro, to protect the land from commercial and residential development. So that's why the easement part of it. And then also on line 13, this easement, the activity that takes place in there basically will focus on preserving, perpetuating, and promoting the indigenous practices of the traditional healing through medicinal plants, and by having this lot set aside, we can then transplant and cultivate and perpetuate native flora that is used for traditional healing. So if everyone is satisfied, what this biodiversity conservation easement is and what it is to be used for, then I don't think there's any need for any amendments unless my colleagues think otherwise. But other than that, that's what Bill 362 proposes to accomplish, is just to set aside 15 acres of Chamorro Land Trust property. It still stays within the Chamorro Land Trust inventory, in the Mangilo coastline for the purpose of being able to preserve herbal plants that are used for local healing, the local healing arts. So with that, Madam Speaker, I would ask my colleagues to favorably consider Bill 362-33. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atta. On the motion, anybody wishing to speak? Anybody wishing to speak on Bill 362-33 COR? On the motion then, Senator Atta? Anyone wishing to speak? If not, do you want a motion to bring it down? Do you want a motion to bring it down then?
Yes, Madam Speaker, so I move to take it down the voting file.
On that motion, no objections. Motion carries. We're going to go ahead and proceed with Bill number 354-33. Senator Espaldon, if you can speak on my behalf based on our conversation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this has already been moved to the third reading file, and it was set aside because there were some thoughts about changing it. But just to reiterate something about this bill 354 basically looks to change the amounts, the threshold amounts that basically dictate of when a person or party needs to go to probate. And this is under Chapter 31 of Title 15. And the title of this chapter in particular is called The Dispositions of Estates of Small Value. And in essence, basically, current law provides that estates of more than $20,000 must go through probate. The law setting these values was in effect as early as 1970 under the Guam Probate Code, the Probate Code of Guam, and was included as part of the Title 15 when it was passed in 1981. So it's been more than 45 years since these values within this section have been adjusted. And in essence, what we're talking about in particular is this $20,000 threshold for small estates. At a minimum, the cost of filing a probate case in the Superior Court of Guam totals at least $1,500 for the filing fees, the mailing, the posting, and the publication costs. The attorney's fees on top of that $1,500 for an estate of $20,000 is around $2,100, whereas the amount of attorney's fees for an estate of $75,000 is only $2,700. In addition, the Superior Court charges an additional closing fee based on the value of the estate. Having to pay an additional $4,200 to close an estate of only $20,000 is very burdensome, particularly to the people or the family who basically have a very small estate. They don't have a lot of holdings, a lot of personal possessions. It's only $20,000, and yet they have to pay a very high price. More than 20% of the estate gets eaten up by the fees and the costs alone. And as the value of the estate increases, the portion of fees and costs go down, but it's still a significant percentage of the estate's value. California now, of which our law was derived from, has a similar law that allows distribution by affidavit of estates up to $150,000. This proposal is significantly smaller. The proposal in this bill is smaller than the $150,000 that California has imposed. I ask my colleagues to consider supporting the increase of the estates of small values to at least the amounts contained in the bill. In the bill, it will go from $20,000 being the threshold before you go into probate to a threshold of $75,000. And this really helps those most in need after the death of somebody in the family. Not much more to be said about that. The other change in this is going from 20,000, which is going from 20,000 as a threshold to 75,000, and then also, excuse me. And also going from a threshold of $3,000, excuse me, let me just read this one area. Summary, this is under 3101, and the change is when a decedent leaves no real property, nor interest therein or lien thereon in the territory of Guam, and the total value of the decedent's property, the decedent is the person who died, in the territory of Guam, excluding any motor vehicle of which the decedent was the owner, or the legal owner, over and above any amounts due to the decedent for services in the armed forces of the United States, and over and above the amount of salary in the past or in present law, over and above the amount of salary not exceeding $3,000 is what it is right now, and we're just increasing that from $3,000 to $6,000. Bottom line is, if somebody dies and they have a salary that's due them, and the amount is right now, if it's over $3,000, you still have to go to probate. We're just increasing that to $6,000, Madam Speaker. And then, of course, the $75,000 kicks in instead of $20,000 on the threshold to go to probate. And then there's also, under Section 2, an increase, and I'll read that. This is basically concerning any deposits and savings institutions. It's entitled Estates Under $10,000, Surviving Spouse's Right to $1,000 from Deposits and Savings and Institutions. We're increasing that amount as well. And that basically reads, whether a person dies testate or intestate, in other words, with a will or without a will, and irrespective of the character of his property, if the value of the estate does not exceed, present law says, if it does not exceed $10,000, then the decedent's surviving spouse, if entitled by succession, shall not to exceed the sum of, right now it's $1,000. They may have something in the savings account. They can, right now it's the law is at $1,000. We're raising that to $2,500. Somebody dies, they have the ability, the wife or the spouse has the ability to access $2,500 from the savings account of the deceased person. And basically, the rest is pretty much self-explanatory at $75,000, from $20,000 to $75,000 as the threshold to go to probate. I do have one amendment, Madam Speaker, and that is in the many conversations that I've had with you and your very interest in this subject matter, having been with public defenders and having worked on many of these kind of cases, and because of your knowledge of this and really a lot of the work that you've done at public defenders while you were there, I would like to add you, Madam Speaker, Senator Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, as a third co-sponsor to this bill.
Thank you, Senator Espadon. On that motion, without any objection, motion carries. Thank you, Senator Espadon. Anybody else wishing to speak on the motion? If not, I'm going to go ahead and move it down to the third reading. Voting file, no objection. No objection. Motion carries. Bill number 354-33CR is in the voting file. Madam Clerk, if I can have the next bill, please. What's in? Ladies and gentlemen, we do know that we are supposed to go back to Bill 285. I understand that legal counsel is still working on the amendments for Senator Frank Uggan. So right now on the agenda, I have item 20 at Bill 366S33CR. Senator Tomat, are you ready?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move to place Bill number 366 as amended by the Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure, Lands, Border Protection, Veterans Affairs, and Procurement to the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it.
That's as amended, right, sir?
Sorry?
You said as amended, right?
Correct.
Yes. Please proceed.
Okay. So, Madam Speaker, basically, what I would like to do actually is let the co-sponsor, Senator Tom, to go ahead and actually explain the bill.
Thank you, Senator Tom Adams. Senator Tommy Morrison, would you care to speak on the main motion?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I also thank the author for allowing me to present Bill 366. Madam Speaker, Bill 366 is one of those measures introduced during the legislative term aimed at ensuring responsible development occurs, particularly in our southern communities. Madam Speaker, some may view that this is maybe an extreme position to take. However, Madam Speaker, we can see that absent a land use plan, that we are seeing extreme, at least, backlash from our community, absent a master plan or to guide development in our southern communities. With the enactment of Public Law 33-145 several months ago, we renewed public discussion on the Southern Development Master Plan, which was established very long ago through Public Law 19-38. With the Southern Development Master Plan Task Force having held its first informal meeting in August of this year, efforts are moving forward to finally complete the work that started many years ago. The completion of the Southern Development Master Plan will finally provide landowners a clear set of guidelines and expectations with respect to development. I also believe that this measure will help incentivize the entire planning process with our mayors, our government agencies, completing the Southern Development Master Plan within 2 years. It's also noted, Madam Speaker, in Public Law 19-38 that once the task force is convened, that the task force must provide to the legislature the master plan within the year or from the date stamped or convening of the task force. Speaker, with the moratoria in place for 2 years or less, our residents, developers, and policymakers alike will be well served by having an honest and transparent dialogue regarding proposed projects. I also believe that this kind of effort will prevent unnecessary lawsuits or challenges by our members in our community, as we are seeing at this moment. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this, and I also want to point out that we've appreciate the the mayors who came out with their MPCs to every meeting that was held by the chairman who conducted these meetings. We thank the staff that participated in ensuring that the meetings were set up properly in every village. And we thank the communities, those who provided testimonies in these specific villages. You'll find also, Madam Speaker, in the committee report that you see that our residents, particularly in the South, are not particularly objecting to development in our southern communities. What's clear is that they want to participate in the process. They would like to understand how their communities, through whatever development or the types of impacts it will have within their surrounding areas and the impacts to the environment. I also makes it very clear, Madam Speaker, from the testimony provided that that our residents want to define the types of development in our community, not necessarily what is being proposed, but through this process of a master plan, have the ability to define how they would like to grow in their community, and with respect also to the property owners, to ensure that there is some clarity to the overall residents, surrounding residents, that have already had some proposed projects in the area. We've learned a lot, Madam Speaker, going through every village, and also learned some projects that we don't see through our media, that some of our residents already have concerns of, with the types of environmental impacts that it's already having in their surrounding areas. I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker, that there has been testimony provided. I've also participated in some forums where some organizations or individuals think that this is an extreme position to take with regards to placing a moratoria for 2 years on any or development down south. What's very clear, Madam Speaker, is even through the public hearings, is the Land Use Commission has put on record that what makes a lot of or poses a lot of challenges through the application process is that we're dealing with an outdated land use or territorial master plan or land use plan. So it makes sense, Madam Speaker, that if they're dealing or working with an outdated territorial master plan and we're proceeding throughout our southern communities or piecemealing applications, not knowing whatever the best use for these properties or whatever has been already put in place as far as the type of uses for these properties. It makes it very clear, Madam Speaker, that with the statements provided by the members of the Land Use Commission, that we should put the brakes on for some time to ensure that if we're proceeding with large-scale projects, particularly in the South, that we understand the impacts to these communities. We spoke a little bit earlier, at least with 365, on some of the process of the ARC. I understand the challenges of that process as well. And it's clear that we are seeing, just for that process alone, that the ARC, or even with the Pago Bay project, that we are seeing position statements come ex post facto or after the fact that what would impact the water resources throughout our southern community. So you can see, absent a updated land use plan for the southern communities or even a southern development master plan, Madam Speaker, certainly we're going to see greater challenges with our communities. I hope to not see backlashes from our communities with regards to development in the South. I do ask a lot of our members to review Public Law 19-38 as it clearly outlines the guidelines for the development of the master plan. So I thank the author for his efforts working through every village down south, or at least starting with Santa Rita, Agate, Umatic, Malesu, Talafofu, Inarahan, Zotnya, and ensuring that we hear the voices of those residents that will be impacted by proposed, particularly large-scale projects. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Senator Ada, did you wish to speak on the motion again, or because you yielded to Senator?
I didn't speak on the motion the first time. I was just handing it off to the vice.
Okay, then I will yield back to you. Thank you, Senator Tom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, very, very simply put, what Bill 366 does is it basically says, all right, let's take a pause on any kind of construction and development in the South. And let's take a pause to give a chance to the task force that has been put together to formulate a master plan, development plan for the South. That way we avoid, development going off in one direction while the task force is finding that the master plan should be going in a different direction. And so basically all it does is it's saying, let's pause on any further development and construction to some extent. Now, legally, you can only pause, development activities for a reasonable period of time. You can't say until we decide that we're ready. And so that's why the moratorium is just for 2 years. Now, for 2 years or until the master plan, so if the master plan gets completed in a year and a half, then the moratorium gets lifted. We did take it around the island to 6 of the 7 villages, and there was no objections or concerns that were raised by the mayors and the residents that were there. However, the committee did receive a number of testimonies from realtors and developers who really objected to this moratorium. And basically they said, you use the M word, the moratorium, and it's gonna, developers are gonna pick up and they're gonna leave town. And that it's probably, so they did raise concerns that this moratorium will have a negative impact on development, on investors wanting to come in, etc. So there is some pushback to this idea of a moratorium. Now, the moratorium basically what it does is, when we say pause, that means DPW is not going to issue any building permits. There will be no zoning or rezoning changes, etc. However, we know that one size does not fit all. So the bill does provide provisions for relief. And if a developer feels like he's really got a good case to go through with their development project, then they can go ahead and submit a land use application to the Department of Land Management. And if they approve it, it needs to be sent to the legislature for information. And at that time, when the legislature receives it, if anybody reacts to it, then it can be brought up at that time. There are some exemptions to this moratorium. So if somebody wants to build a house in a residential home in Maritzo, that's not affected by the moratorium. For those land use applications that have already been approved or have gotten a building permit already and they're standing at the ready line, ready to go, those are not affected by the moratorium. But probably a significant item in this bill, and I guess one could argue whether it's germane or not. As a sponsor of the bill, I think it is. But we went ahead and put in this Section 6, which basically said that any approved zone or summary zone change shall expire 5 years from the date of recordation if no building permit is applied for or granted, and shall revert to pre-application zone, land use, and conditions. A good example of this is that hotel that was proposed to be built in Agate, the one across from the Agate Marina. I think that land use application was approved like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when the physical situation surrounding that lot was quite different from what it is today. So back then, it did not have a lot of those subdivisions that are back there. Now, you've got a number of subdivisions that are in there, and now they want to build this hotel. So it's quite different from from what existed back when they applied for the land use and got approved. And, 15 years later, they come forward and say, okay, we're ready. And in the meantime, the world kept moving, and now it's a totally different situation. So we did put in that provision in there. And so with that, I certainly hope that my colleagues will favorably consider Bill 366. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tom. Anybody else on the main motion? Senator Mike Nicholas, I'll recognize you now.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a couple items I wanted to discuss with respect to the bill, but the first I'd like to dispose of is a housekeeping measure that was passed through from our legal counsel that I'd like to propose as an amendment that has been circulated to the members to add a Section 4, no waiver of immunity. Nothing in this act shall be construed as a waiver of sovereign immunity by the government of Guam for which any action, either in law or in equity, may lie.
Yeah, Senator Mike, can you make that number Bill 366? We're not on 285, right?
Yes, my apologies, Madam Speaker. Bill 366.
The floor amendment should read 3.
Bill number 366-33.
I'm on the motion to at least correct the bill number as stated on top of the amendment so we can save a tree from 285 to 366 on the motion. We're talking about 366, Senator Mike?
Yes, 366 and add on page 3.
Right, so on the motion to correct that amendment, I'm just going to do this as a technical clearance. So it's going to be on Bill 36. I'm going to go ahead and take a recess. I'm sorry. We are back from recess. Senator Mike Nicholas, you still have the floor on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have some confusion here. I'm going to withdraw that amendment.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On that motion?
Yes, please.
No objection. Senator Mike, you still have the floor on Bill 366-33.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to raise a question on page 2. I understand the intent of the bill, and it was very well explained. But on Section 3, we have language that says relief from the moratoria, and it reads, a landowner may file for relief from the moratoria in Section 2 by submitting an application to the Guam Land Use Commission pursuant to 21 GCA. A copy of all approved Guam Land Use Commission notice of actions shall be transmitted to the legislature for information within 15 days of the Guam Land Use Commission's decision. And so my question was, we're putting in place this moratoria for 2 years unless the Southern Development Master Plan is crafted before that. But with this relief provision, does that mean that the Guam Land Use Commission can still take in any kind of application and then just provide the relief so long as it complied with 21 GCA? And if that is the case, then how does this affect the actual moratorium? Because isn't the Guam Land Use Commission the one that's approving all of these permits anyway?
I'm going to direct that question to Senator Tom Adams. Would you like to answer?
Yes, Madam Speaker. And as I had stated when I was explaining the bill, basically the bill recognizes that one size does not fit all. And so this is not an absolute moratorium. Section 3, relief from the moratoria, basically recognizes that there may be certain projects that a good example, well, actually, we put in there that well, I mean, just about anything. If a developer feels there's a project that would be very highly beneficial to that particular municipality, they can take their case to the Guam Land Use Commission, make their case, and if they get it approved, fine. Otherwise, the Land Use Commission is aware that there is this moratoria in southern Guam. So yes, it does provide a relief valve.
Senator Nicholas, are you okay with that answer?
I do appreciate the answer, but it just kind of causes me to really pause and reflect on the language, intent, and effects of the bill. The intent of the bill, from what I understand, is to put a moratorium in place. And this moratorium is intended to cause the Guam Land Use Commission to halt from moving forward projects unless they comply with the exceptions in Section 4. But then with Section 3, we're allowing that very same body that we're telling them to halt, we're saying you can still do it anyway. And so I'm concerned then that by having this Section 3 in here and by taking this action with this bill, we're going to be sending the signals to the community, the investment community, as the real estate professionals have stated. We're going to be sending the signals that moratoriums are possible, and we're going to be bearing the consequences that may be associated with that kind of signal, but we're not actually putting moratoriums in place. I mean, we're not putting hardline moratoriums in place. We're putting moratoriums in place that could be relieved by the very same people that we're trying to cause to pause. So if we're going to set a moratorium, perhaps we can put the exceptions so that it's clear in Section 4 and strike Section 3, or perhaps we should reconsider whether or not sending this signal in this way would be the best way to go about doing this. Because if we're going to be saying we're going to be doing moratoriums on development, but then writing into that very same statement language that would allow for those moratoriums to really just be bypassed by the same group, the Land Use Commission that we're trying to say there's a moratorium on, we're sending the signals, but we're actually not effectuating the process. Because if the Land Use Commission just wanted to move a project forward by virtue of this section here, they technically can. And so I'm trying to struggle with how the bill accomplishes what I think the call of the community is in a way that does it wholly, as opposed to with this particular language, and not just causing harm to the industry, the real estate and development industry. So I guess I would like to pose that as a general statement, and perhaps reserve time to speak if we get more discussion on what I'm presenting here. But in a nutshell, Madam Speaker, this relief from moratoria in Section 3 just kind of opens the door for this to not really be a moratorium.
I'm going to go ahead and take a brief recess. This legislature is back in session. I understand in the recess, I know that you guys were conferring with each other. I'm going to go ahead and yield back to Senator Tom Atta. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, after much discussion with my colleagues, we would like to I would like to make the motion to send Bill 366-33 back to committee.
On that motion, without any objections, motion carries.
The next one is an easy one.
Senator Tom Atta, you're next on bill number 367-33.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 367-33 now, as amended by the Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure, Lands, Border Protection, Veterans Affairs, and Procurement, and as further substituted on the floor. So there's a new version that's being handed out. And the as further substituted on the floor version really is making, it's more of administrative type or typographical changes.
Okay, I'm going to move to accept this version without any objections. Motion carries. Senator Atta, go ahead and put it on the third reading, then we can discuss.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the new substituted Bill 367, then I'll move to place it in the third reading, and I'd like to discuss it.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, back in the 30th legislature, this legislature adopted a new set of building codes and fire codes and plumbing codes and all that, to replace really an obsolete set of codes that Guam was using. And it just so happened that, of course, that version of the codes have every 3 years, the codes get updated. So 2009, we adopted the 2009, and then the 2012 came out, and then now we're dealing with the 2015. So what we have here is we're basically adopting a more up-to-date set of codes. On Section 1, it talks about the codes pertaining to the means of egress sizing. And that has to do with the International Fire Code. So basically what happened is when we adopted the 2009 International Fire Code, the requirements for your egress, your evacuation stairwells, was a lot more stringent. It required the stairwells to be a lot wider so that you can evacuate an X number of occupants within a certain amount of time. And we found that 3 years later, that requirement was changed and basically relaxed, so to speak, the standards for the size of the egress, the size of the stairwells. So now, instead of having these big stairwells, the new code allows you to really come up with a narrower stairwell, but that has to be mitigated by now having other offsetting fire safety measures, such as, for example, requiring voice-actuated alarms. Instead of just the old buzzer that goes off and nobody pays attention to, what's going to be required as an offset to the narrower egress sizing is that now you have to have this alarm system that says, this is not a drill, this is a fire, evacuate the building, and so, that's different. It also requires the premises to maintain their safety, fire safety systems. And if they decide for whatever reason they're going to discontinue the fire safety maintenance, they have to inform the fire department. And so those are some of the changes that were made with respect to the International Fire Code. Now, what you see there on this substituted bill is it shows the numbers 604.6, 901.9, and 1031.2. Those were highlighted in gray and were struck out. So really, it should be reading then for all new construction, sections 105, 1005, and 1030.2 of the 2009 Fire Code may be disregarded as a whole, and provided they are replaced by now these new sections in the 2015 Fire Code. Now, so what impact does this have? So you have, for example, we have a new hotel down in Tumon that really kind of anticipated the new code because it was trending that way, and under the 2009 code would not have met the fire code. So by passing this, the size of their egress right now, plus the other safety measures that they have, fire safety measures, will bring them into compliance with the new 2015 fire code. So nobody is getting get off the hook. Safety is still paramount, and safety is not being compromised by making these changes. Now, when we make these changes in the fire code, there are also similar changes that need to be made in the building code that are related to what we're changing in the fire code that's being adopted. So that's the first set of changes to the building code that we're making. In section 3 on page 2, the automatic sprinkler system, again, we're updating it from the 2009 to now the 2015. And basically what this requirement is, under the 2009, if you own a furniture store, even if you just got a one-room showroom, you got to have put in all these fire sprinklers. Now the new fire code basically does away with that requirement. Section 5 pertains to new regulations pertaining to open flames and Tiki torches. And this here is being adopted to address the situation that what happened several years ago at a hotel down in Tumon, where the Tiki torches, the gas lines were leaking or whatever, and an explosion occurred, and just lucky that nobody got killed. So this Section 5 will address that situation. Then we have on Section 6 on page 4, tempered water. In the building codes, the 2009 building codes, it requires public bathroom facilities to be hooked up to a hot water heater. And many of our public buildings do not have hot water hooked up to the wash basins. But this requirement, of course, does not affect that requirement in, for example, in the hospitals, because they have their own set of codes that they have to abide by. But basically, what Section 6 says is that tempered water shall be delivered from public hand washing facilities only where required by law or ordinance. Otherwise is not required to be tempered. Other law or ordinance is basically, there's different laws, like I said, that pertains to the hospitals and other health clinics where hot water must be provided. And so that, Madam Speaker, is what Bill 367 does. It updates the fire code to the 2015 standards. And of course, it was important that we do this. Otherwise, and again, like I said, nobody is getting let off the hook. It was either you comply with the more standard code standards, or you can use the newer standard, which relaxes certain requirements, but is also offset by other safety requirements that must be put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rada. Anybody on the main motion? One. On the main motion, Senator Torres, we're gonna take a minute recess.
Thank you.
The legislature is back in session. I understand that several of you have already conferred with the primary sponsor of the bill, and you're good. So therefore, Senator Ada, do you want to say add any additional comments before we send it down?
I'll just send it down.
So on the motion then to send 367-33 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Senators, we're going to recess until 9 tomorrow morning. Recess.